If you're watching a sport that has 11 players on both sides, goes on for about 90 minutes, has funny to questionable crowd chants, and the occasional naked person running across the pitch, then you are most likely watching football. This sport has this name in most corners of the world. Football is an English name, but even countries with non-English languages use a variation of the name. In Germany it is called Fußball, in Mexico it's called Football, and in India it's called Fotoball. So in the wonderful, nonsensical world of language, it only makes sense that in other English-speaking countries, minus the UK, football isn't called football. Other English-speaking countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and of course the United States of America use an entirely different name for the beautiful game. Soccer. This name of soccer sounds literally nothing like the name football. So where on earth did it come from? Well, to understand this, we need to understand the history of football as a whole. And for the moment, when I say football, I mean the one played with feet and an actual ball. More on that other football later. The basis of football is actually a pretty ancient sport. As a game with pretty universal rules, the concept of teams of people kicking a ball into a goal area has been around for thousands of years. Records of a game like football can date back to many parts of the world, from a Mesoamerican sport where the leader of the losing team would be sacrificed, to the ancient Chinese game of Cuju. The modern game of football as we know it today, however, came from England in the 12th century. However, this was vastly different to football we know today. Whole towns of people would play one huge game. The pitch wouldn't be a grass rectangle like we know it today, but rather a whole town. Not only this, but it could get pretty vicious and players could punch the ball as well as kick it. This version of the game was banned for centuries before becoming popular again in the 17th century. From this crazy sport that used hands, feet, and you were allowed to attack the player, not only birthed modern football but the sport of rugby too. English schools would play against each other, most famously the schools of Rugby and Eton. Eton preferred playing the game with their feet, while Rugby preferred playing the game with their hands, hence how the sport of rugby got its name. Also, the name football comes from the fact you kick the ball with your foot. I didn't think I needed to explain that one, but just for completion's sake. These different playing styles were all getting a bit out of hand, so official rules had to be put in place for these two different playing styles of this one crazy game. This came in the form of a meeting in 1863 that standardised the rules, size of the pitch, and weight and size of the ball. From this meeting, this one crazy confusing sport was split into two sports, rugby football and association football. So why was all this important to know? Well, not only did it pad out this video, but it was from this official name of football, association football, where we get the name soccer from. Both these sports were originally more games for the upper class of England. What's interesting is association football was known as just soccer before it was known as just football. Soccer was the name given to it by the upper class. It was only when the game became more popular with the working class it became known as just football. So why did the upper class call it soccer? Well, there's a tendency in the upper class of England to give things and people a nickname where it's their name with or ers added to the end. In example, J.R.R. Tolkien was known as Tollers by his close friends. This is what happened with the name association football. It was shortened to a soccer, and eventually the A was dropped to just make the name soccer. So, from the high society of England to across the pond, why was it the name of soccer and not football that was popularised in the US? Well, it seems to be because the name football was already taken for a sport in the States. That being the sport of American football. You know, the one where you barely use your foot in it, and where the ball is barely a ball. Zinnaf in his video on this subject called this sport hand-egg, which is a much better name for the sport. When that original sport of football was split into rugby football and association football in the aforementioned meeting in 1863, rugby football went on to become popular in other parts of the world, one of these parts of the world being the US. In the States they added and changed the rules of the game until it became the modern sport we know it as today. The full name of this sport is rugby football, and this was the American version of that sport, so it became American football, borrowing the football part of the name that we see at the end of rugby football. So much time and confusion in human history would have been saved if they borrowed the rugby part of the name instead and called it American Rugby. A huge thank you as always to all my patrons for supporting the channel. I really couldn't make this video if it weren't for awesome viewers like you watching and supporting the channel on Patreon. Why not donate just $2 a month to help support Name Explain and get your name here with all these fantastic people? Together, let's see if we can hit $600 by the end of June. Thank you.